All right. So, welcome everybody. We have people from the EduCap team. We have people from the community foundations and from the larger Kettering Foundation family. And we'll have more people that will join. Thank you so much for your time, John, and for for your time. Everybody who is here with us. Some of you've participated also last time, and that was in March, beginning of March. And what I propose for this session, for this dialogue, is not to get into a lot of details about ABCD methodology, because we've already shared a lot of information on that. You also had the link available with the discussion where John gave a very nice presentation on how he started and how things developed. And maybe just, I don't know, John, 3, 4, 5 minutes with the main ideas that we would want to share about asset-based community development methodology. And then I would invite everybody to get into a dialogue related to not only how do we get to assess resources that we have and to map resources that we have in communities and how to use them, but how do we share these resources, these assets from one community to another, and not only geographical communities, because it's a lot about how do we transfer knowledge, expertise, resources from public sector to non-governmental, from private to non-governmental, from non-governmental to public, and so on. So it's also in between sectors and within or among community of practices. So this is the discussion that we are inviting everybody to today. And one operational detail, please, if you don't speak or you don't have comments, mute yourself. In this way, we'll not have background noises. So, John, you have the floor.
All right. Let me do a little language map to start, so we're talking in the same framework. When I'm thinking about the three principal assets in a neighborhood, Marcia, just a minute. Okay. All right, I'll call. My wife's on the phone, pardon me. The three principal human assets are individuals, and I would say probably their families, a kinship. And the next is what we would call associational life, self-forming organizations of people who gather for all kinds of reasons. They may gather because they were veterans in a war, or they may gather because they want to read books together. They may gather because they bicycle together, but they are not paid, they're self-forming, they're small, and we would call those associations. And they are the magnifiers of the gifts, talents, and skills of individuals. You become much more powerful and able to have your voice heard and magnified if you're in an association than if you're speaking alone. And the third piece of the human map in the neighborhood is the institutions. And by that, I mean the three classic institutions, businesses, not-for-profits, or you might say NGOs, and governments, right? Those are institutions. They are gatherings of people who are paid to do what they do. All right. So we would say, one of the questions I heard you pose, and you're interested in the relationship between institutions and associations. It's that space on the map of assets, right? And that's our greatest interest as well over the years. So when you think about that relationship, we would say that an ABCD methodology in terms of the relationship between associations and institutions starts with the associations, not with the institutions. And let's say we're in a neighborhood and we want to achieve something in that neighborhood. We want to build a park for dogs. So we look at all the assets we have in the neighborhood first. And that tells us whether or not we have the human and physical, and if necessary, financial assets to create this dog park. However, it may be in some cases that what we want to do, we have some of the assets here in the neighborhood, but we're going to have to get some additional assets from institutions, right? And that has a word we commonly use, co-production. That is, we are both the producers, the associations and the institutions. The third possibility is that it becomes clear to us that we don't have the resources to do it. And even with the resources from, joining us in co-production, we still can't do it. That it can only be done by an institution. For instance, on our street, we don't feel very safe because we don't have enough street lights. We're not going to be able to get street lights with our resources, nor with the resources of most other institutions. In the United States, at least, the government is going to have to take full productive responsibility for putting the street light in. So that's the ABCD process. You don't start with the institution, you start with the association. And the little motto we would use is, you don't know what you need from an institution till you know what you have in association. So you would never start with an institution. You'd always start with associations. So let me just, so if anybody said, what is the process of an ABC approach to the relationship between institutions and associations? It is those three possibilities, but the chronology is critical. You start with the local people finding out what it is they have as resources to do what they want to do. And another way of saying that is, at the local level, people can decide what needs to be done. You know, what are the issues or things we want to create, how it ought to be done, and if possible, what can we get ourselves and our neighbors together to do it, so that we end up being the producer. If you start with institutions, what almost always happens is the institutions become the primary producer. And so that's the short course on ABCD methodology in relationship between associations, which we call triangles, and institutions, which we say are, associations, which are circles, institutions, which are triangles. Let me stop.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, we start with associations. You know, one of the challenges that, for instance, I faced in various instances whereby if you want to keep it informal, there is a pressure to make it formal. At a certain moment, somebody is saying, yeah, but let's establish it. It's either a project within an established organization is like, now let's build another thing out of this. It's like, no, but let's keep it like this. Let's keep it informal. Or you start something like a group of initiative, and at a certain moment, people will say, let's make it formal. Let's become a charity or an NGO, right? Um, this is one comment that I have. It's something that I see and I saw in the last 10-15 years happening.
Yeah. Well, now what to add? The next chapter of an ABCD approach. And we would say associations have three kinds of histories. One kind of history is an association gets formed and it lives on and on for a long time, for a lifetime, for centuries. Quaker friends churches, for instance, were formed, I don't know, in the 1700s, and there's one right here. So it's an association that has persevered through time. The second is that there are associations that are formed for a rather immediate purpose. And when they're done fulfilling that purpose, they close, they die, they end, right? The people on the block who decide to come together to build a dog park probably will no longer exist after the dog park has been built. Right? So we say every place in the world there are graveyards full of associations that died because they were successful, right? They did their job and they dissolved, right? The third history is the one you're talking about. And that is that some associations begin to become formal and are the seedbed from which institutions grow. And at least in the United States, most universities were started by associations. Most hospitals were formed by associations. Two examples of groups of people who got together as an association but ended up as an institution. Okay, so that is to say, it's not necessarily bad that an association would move from being a group of citizens who are self-forming and don't get paid into an institution, because an awful lot of new ways of doing things happen because associations conceive it, and then in order to achieve it, they institutionalize. Is that so? It's not necessarily bad, I'm saying. What is bad, I think, is that the institutions, in order for the associations to deal with them, the institutions say, you have to become more like us. If you're going to get our money or deal with us, then you're going to have to become more formal and more like an institution. We can't talk to. We can't talk well with associations. We want you to become more like us, right? We want you to register as a not-for-profit or an NGO, and we want you to start having planning meetings and following certain protocols and evaluations that will result in our telling whether or not you've done what we wanted you to do. So,
yeah,
I
okay.
think it's good if associations create institutions intentionally, and usually it's not so good if institutions, in essence, relate to associations in ways that institutionalize the association, so you lose the association's unique power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So now we have actually the whole picture. We've defined the terms, and I think we can open it to dialogue, because that's
Good.
the idea, to have either comments, questions, and of course I would very much invite everybody to relate to not general things necessarily, but to things that are coming from experience, and well, or starting from conceptual areas to get into very clear examples. So anyway, who wants to comment, ask?
I would have a question on networks and even federations, or no, federation is probably a super organization, but what about decentralized group? What about networks that are more like fan-based communities? Or can there be another logic whereby, actually you mentioned it, maybe AA, but it's something that has the same operating logic, but does not become it doesn't become a place. It's a practice rather. So I'm thinking,
Yes.
and the reason why I'm asking this, the concrete reason, is because some of us in the room are thinking of how can we create a form of keeping together and of coordinating resources without becoming institutionalized.
Yes. Well, I think in the United States of two organizations that are made up of lots of small units and have been incredibly effective. One is Alcoholics Anonymous, and the other is La Leche League. Do you know in Europe? Do you know La Leche League? It is a worldwide organization now, but it's groups of women who come together in order to learn how to breastfeed and support each other in breastfeeding. I think there are 28,000 of these groups all over, a lot of them in Africa. And they are much like AA gatherings. They're mothers who are coming together, or talking about nurturance of children, and probably more than just breastfeeding. But they are famous in the United States because they're an example of an association that took away power from an institution. And they did this. When back when I was an infant in the 30s in the United States, almost all the doctors who were OBGYN or pediatricians said that it was best to feed baby formula, artificial. Do you know formula? The artificial, I don't know what you call it, artificial milk or whatever. And it was more sanitary and safer. A lot of research indicated that was not true. And so these little groups of women, after they had gotten formed and were operating in a lot of places, they took on the task collectively of doing everything they could to fight the formula companies. and to get the doctors to say that it was breastfeeding was preferred over formula. And so they communicated together, and they were all over the United States, so they could become lobbyists with their legislators and and with the medical profession. And they finally got the American Academy of Pediatrics to change its policy and to say formula is not nearly as good as breastfeeding. So that they had a huge policy impact. So that any woman who went to a doctor would no longer be advised that formula was the good thing for her to do. So that's an example of autonomous small groups who network together in order to influence an institution to change its policy, and in changing policy, help the associations achieve their goals.
Thank you.
Now, AA is not such a group. AA has always had the position that they don't take anything outside the door of their meeting. There is no effort to stop people drinking, right, or deal with the problem of alcoholism in policy worlds by AA. They have a rule against that. You don't speak outside in AA's name, right? So there are two models. One that says we are not linking together for policy purposes. And the other that says one of our purposes is to link together to change policy. Is that?
Thank you.
Okay, if there are any other questions or comments, Mihai, welcome, and also Tudor, welcome.
I have a few questions.
Andrea.
And Roxana, I think. Yeah, I have a question related to a problem we have at the Fundația Comunitară Galați. And it feels that one of the problems is that we don't have enough initiators, like people who are willing to do things. And I'm wondering if there is a formula, like the, I don't know, the breast milk formula to raise initiators within the community. And then
how do you find it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, I mean, because you have this methodology which is based on resources. You see, for the community foundation, there is this challenge, you know, like to create the context, the right context to raise the resources to have initiators. I don't know if it's making sense. I have a colleague from Fundația Comunitară Sibiu, and she says that they have projects in which they spray and pray that, you know, the right thing will happen, the right people will get activated, and so on. Yeah, so I was thinking, what are you thinking? Or if you have some examples of formulas on that. Yeah. And another question is connected to Alexandra's question and your answer. I was thinking about Alcohol Anonymous group, and then the other example that you had, you had examples of groups coming together with a common goal. And I was thinking if there are any structures or networks or groups where you have people with different goals but stay within the same structure. I mean, they do not get unified with having the same purpose, but they stay within the same structure.
Yeah, good. Let me try both of those. And the first one, remind me, the first one was about what you call initiators, right? You're interested in initiators, yeah. Well, now, once again, from an ABCD perspective, we would say that there are three things that are necessary for an asset-based development to take place. First, people in a place have to know what assets are there, right? And so there's a lot of stuff goes on called asset mapping. And we have publications at our site, abcdinstitute.org, that show how to go about this kind of mapping. So what do we have here, right, is the first question. The second thing we know, and this is drawn on about 2,000 case studies, is that the assets we named, the 5 basic ones, are in almost any place, from African village in desert to New York City, right? So the assets are there, but they are generally not as visible as they should be. The second step is, or finding is, that every story about local people coming together to make things better is a story about assets that were not connected becoming connected. 2,000 stories about all kinds of things people were doing. They were doing things about health. They're doing things about safety. They're doing things about recreation. Okay. But in every single one of those stories, this finding is accurate, and that is they had something there that they connected with something else that was there. So that the operative function at a local level for community building is not, we think, leadership. It is what we would call connectorship, and you would call an initiator. Something has to be connected. That's the second thing. You know what you have, and you got to begin to get the assets connected. The third and final thing is that in general, that connection process doesn't happen unless an individual, an association, or an institution takes an initiative that begins the process of those being connected, right? Somebody has to act to get the connections done, right? Those 3 steps. Now, so a lot of our work focuses on who are the connectors in a neighborhood, who are the natural connectors. And here, our research would suggest that one never need train connectors. That we know of no block on the United States where there aren't 2 or 3 connectors already, right? They may not be connecting, but they have the talents of connectors. And I once took a half a year to do research on connectors. What are they like, right? And they have 4 characteristics I felt. Two characteristics all of them had, 2 others most of them had. So if you're out looking for them, let me tell you the 4 characteristics. Who are you looking for as a connector or initiator, right? And the first is somebody who is well connected. Somebody who already lives in the world of associational life, right? I remember an African-American woman that I met in a town in Georgia. And I gave her a piece of paper and I said, Frankie, here are you, draw lines out to everything you're associated with. And by the time she's done, she had 25 things, right? We want her. We're looking for her, right? Somebody who has that kind of a relational map. Let me see. I'm trying to remember this. I did it so long ago. There. Well, the second thing is that they tend to believe that their community is welcoming. A lot of people in neighborhoods don't feel that way. And so they don't have a lot of relationships with other people because they don't feel welcome. But these people believe the place is welcoming, and in fact, their action makes the welcome happen, right? They are, boy, there are 2 others, and I'm just not pulling them out of my mind. I'm sorry, I can't pull out of my mind the other 2. Sure, if you look on our website under connectors, you will see a paper where the other 2 characteristics are.
Yeah, that's right. You don't have to nominate them now.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure I can find them. Yeah.
The big thing is that some foundations have tried to train people to be connectors. And the real issue is what you need to do is find them, not train them. Because they are already in place with a lot of relationships, right? You train somebody and send them into the neighborhood, they have no relationships. They're practically worthless, right? So one of the things we do is help groups find connectors or find a process of connecting. Now there is one city in Canada which is the great example of a place which has developed a method to find 1, 2, or 3 connectors on every block. And this city is Edmonton, Canada. It's a city of about 1 million people. It's pretty big. I think it has 115 designated neighborhoods, might have 30, 40 blocks in each neighborhood, and they're finding a connector on each one of those blocks, right? Now, this started on one block where a guy who was a connector began to find out information about his neighbors and began to connect them around that information that he found out, right? That he found that 5 people were concerned about health, and two of them said what makes health around here is walking. So they formed a block association of walkers. And the walkers then met every day and walked together and got to know each other and began to pick up cans or refuse along the way so that they help keep the streets clean, right? And then they became an association in and of itself. So a connector is often not just connecting two people, but three people or four people together who have the same general interest or ability or talent, right? And forming multiple associations at the block level. Right? Then those can become together and become the block organization. So you can read about this initiative on the internet, and the name of the initiative is the Abundant Community Initiative in Edmonton, Canada. I think they have half of their neighborhoods with connectors on every block. And then the connectors get together and learn from each other. And they, no connector is paid, but they do pay a person in a neighborhood, and they'd say, well, there are 50 blocks in this neighborhood. We'll pay you to find 50 connectors. Who are these people? These people who find connectors are connectors, right? They know who they're looking for because they are one themselves, right? And generally speaking, this works. The people can find people of this nature, and they themselves are often in networks where they can begin to get to know a couple of people on the block, talk to them, find out who pulls people together here, or who knows more people than anybody else, and that kind of thing. And then that person, probably they would do a little training with that person. And the training that they would do would be, what are the kinds of things that you could learn about the assets held by individuals in the neighborhood? That's the starting point. Your primary asset is the gifts, the skills, the passions, and the knowledge, at least those four things, of the people in the neighborhood.
So, John, you are talking about the Edmonton, right? The Edmonton in Canada.
Yeah. This is, I'm telling you how they work.
Yeah. I'm also sending the link to their website, Abundant Community Edmonton. I'll put it in the chat here.
Good. Now, something has happened that may be bad. It goes to your question. The man who started this whole thing was a genius at finding connectors, right? And so he got people around him, and they formed an association, and they went from block to block on request, finding connectors and beginning to train the connectors on how to work. And this has had such a strong and powerful effect on participation by the people in the neighborhoods that the city council and the city government could see that all kinds of things that were getting done that weren't getting done before, right? And so they thought this was wonderful. And so they said to the guy who started it, we'd like to hire you. We'll make you the director of neighborhoods. And you'll have resources. We'll give you 3 or 4 employees that can work for you. So they've done that. But as you started us out, it is very dangerous, because now that he's in the city government is liable to begin to say, well, we need proof of outcomes, right? We need you to set up an evaluation system. And before long, they begin to look like it's the city hall, the city council, and the citizens at the bottom. We hope this man is very sophisticated who started, and he understands this problem, right? But that would be a great site to look at, and they've got it developed to a pretty fine art, and they have activated more people on more neighborhoods to do more constructive things than any city I know in North America. And they have done it by finding a connector on each block and having them find out what people have as gifts, skills, passions, and knowledge, and begin to connect them around those things. So that they're forming associations or pairs. You want to learn how to play the piano, I can play the piano. So that's another kind of connection that they might make. Right?
Yeah. Actually, while you were talking about this community and the way the connectors are working, I was immediately thinking of the discussion that we had, a few weeks ago with Edgar Khan and his team, because you can use time banks for that.
Yes.
For this relationship to happen, either informal time banks, because we've discussed that in various areas, including like in Eastern Europe, but in so many other communities in Asia, in Africa, and I'm sure also in the States, and for sure in Guatemala, Gustavo, people are doing this. They are helping each other, but without writing down that, oh, I helped you, you need to give me 1 hour, or this is a credit of 1 hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one more comment that I have, it's we talked a little bit about it, John, when we were in Dayton, about how we try in EduCab, working with librarians, especially in small communities, to actually give enough expertise, energy, courage to these people to become community mobilizer and community mobilizers and connectors, because they are anyway connectors and community mobilizers, but they don't know. Some know, but there are very few. We have, if you, for instance, Roxana, Corina, we have Ioana here, we have other people from EduCab, Misha, we have each of us one county that we take care. For instance, in Romania, in each county, you don't have more than 3-4 librarians out of 40, let's say, that are really community mobilizers, and they, move mountains from one part to another. The others, you might have like 30-40% that they need a little bit to activate them. And for us, this is one of the battles that we want to undertake, is to how can we empower these people that are already there. They have resources, they have an institution that is designed by default somehow to become a connector, because it's the space where you can mediate expertise, knowledge, information, events, trainings, and so on. So yeah.
So state the question. You're breaking up just a little. It's a little hard for me to hear. So can you say in 2-3 sentences what your question is?
No, it was actually a comment, not a question. It was
Okay.
a comment starting from what you were describing with the connectors,
Yeah.
and how we also approach it in what we
Good.
do.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a second question that go ahead. There's a second question that I was asked 2 questions in a row by who spoke to me before you did.
Alexandra.
Yeah, and the second one, it can
Or
wait,
Andrea.
actually.
Andrea.
Maybe Roxana wants
Okay.
to ask something. I mean, at least
Okay.
one question per person would be okay.
Okay. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Roxana. I'm also from EduCab. I work with Mihai and some other people in this group. And I would also like to add on what Mihai said, but I have the impression now, understanding better the ABCD methodology, that public libraries are both associations and institutions. And that's, I just wanted to know, because they have, they subordinate to institutions, they are then in themselves institutions, but they also can be like community mobilizers, like Mihai said. So I wanted to ask, do you have any more examples of that, or how do you deal with that? Because it's a peculiar situation, as we sometimes come up with many ideas of librarians doing many things that they actually can do, and it's not so complicated for them to do in their communities because they know the community the best. But they are they are caught in the middle somehow. They have this it's a hybrid thing. So yeah, I'm just curious if you had more experiences with, or if you know people who are actually going, who are working with this kind of situations.
Yeah, in the United States, the federal government has a bureau called, I think, the Institute for Museums, Libraries, and Zoos. Something like that, IMLS. And we, the ABCD Institute as an entity, have had a contract with them for several years to work with libraries as well as some museums in terms of developing models for those libraries to become more and more effective in their connection in the neighborhoods around them, right? And so that work is, we are learning a great deal. And I can put you in touch with the director of that initiative if you would like to contact her directly. Now, they haven't got everything written because it's still in process. I think it's 4 years long, and it's 2 years and some along. So the final documentation and tools, I think, will be forthcoming later. But they have learned a lot in terms of how to work with these libraries, a lot about various kinds of initiatives that they can take that will make them more effective in their relationship with local people. Is that so? Rather than my trying to tell you about them, but they know. And the woman who is in charge is named April, as in the month April, Donor, Doner. And I'm going to have to get up out of my chair for a minute to get you her email. But would it be just as good if I sent to?
Yes, you can send it maybe afterwards to Mihai.
Yeah. Okay, let me make it. I'll do that. Yeah, and she'd be more than happy to email with you or talk with you. Okay. Now, one other thing that I can tell you that I'm involved with is in rural United States and Canada, where farming is the main thing people do. One of the biggest problems that is very strong in the consciousness of people in rural areas is suicide. Because the smaller farms are increasingly becoming uneconomic, and people who've been 4 generations on that farm are having to sell. And, you know, the man has worked on the farm, the woman has worked on the farm for 40 years. It's going under, and they see no future. And especially the men are committing suicide quite frequently. So a lot of people have gotten together in lots of places, farmers and people from the villages who are concerned about the suicide problem, right? And the most significant indicator of whether somebody is likely to become mentally ill, if you had a general population and said, which of these people are most likely to become mentally ill? They aren't right now, but the best, most common indicator is that they are isolated. Okay? So from a medical perspective, if you could deal with isolation, you would probably do more to prevent mental illness than anything else. So I am working with one county in the southwest Wisconsin. This is dairy country. Everybody's, you know, raising cows and milking them. And so a little group got together who wanted to try to do something about suicide. And one member of the group is the librarian. And I said to them, you know, isolation is the predictor of mental illness. How can we think about getting people who are isolated connected with other people? And I said to them, you have an asset all around you that I'll bet you don't know, which is groups of people who are coming together and are not isolated. And they're called associations. Right? And so the librarian said, well, let's find out. And so she had 3 students from the high school who were assigned to her. And over about a half a year, she found in this county, which is, it's a really rural county, the county seat, the capital of the county, has 6,000 people. Everything else is smaller. And she found 152 associations that had names, not informal ones, that had names in that county. And so they are using that information that she gathered, right, to then try to begin to contact the more isolated people and say, look at all these kinds of associations. You've always been interested in automobiles, and here are 3 automobile associations here. Let's see if we like to have you invited to that kind of thing. Begin to take isolated people and get them connected. So that's an experiment that we're watching very carefully. But libraries, I think, are natural places to do something that they don't think of. They are collections of knowledge written in books. But in the county, every person in that county has knowledge too.
Yeah.
We know that if you ask the right questions, most people will tell you 3 to 4 things they know well enough they could teach somebody else.
True. Yeah.
But if there are 10,000 people in the county, and we got to all of them, and each of them knew 3 things, that's 30,000 topics. So there's more knowledge in the county than there is in the library.
Yes.
So how could we put the library in a position that it not only had the knowledge of the books, but the knowledge of the residents and the opportunities to learn by joining associations? So those are the 2 core activities of ABCD. Anyway, finding out what people have to offer as assets and contributors. And number 2, forming associations to get it done. So I think libraries are, I think they're institutions. I mean, there's a head librarian, an assistant librarian. I mean, they're a triangle. But I think they are the most friendly of all institutions. And that, you know, a lot of people in the professions call themselves servants. They say we're providing human services or social services or public services. But they aren't. They act mostly like lords, right? They got all the power, they got all the money, and they call themselves servants. Come on. But who really is the institution that is seriously about being a servant is libraries.
True. Thanks.
I thought sometime I'd write an essay called "The Friendliest Servant in Town."
Yeah, that's why we are also very fond and we in love with the libraries, and trying to either build libraries in small communities or build capacity within the existing libraries. Yeah, and we see a lot of potential, especially as we are saying in the communities, like the rural communities and you know, small towns and so on. Thank you. We have with us more people. We have Luisa, we have Vishal. Hi. We have another 5 minutes.
I'm going.
John,
yeah,
do
5
we have
minutes.
another 5 minutes?
But can I say to all the rest of you, we are a flat organization, the ABCD Institute. We don't even have a director, right? We have an executive assistant, 1 paid person. So, but this thing, ABCD, is spread around the world. And it's because we have 52 people we call faculty. They're mostly practitioners who communicate the ABCD methodology. And I'm trying to do that. So what I wanted to say to all of you is, you're in different places and different groups, but if you would let me know, we are constantly about the business of sharing the ABCD methods with all kinds of groups and institutions. And if this kind of a discussion would be helpful for any of the rest of you, you can get in touch with me and I can try to arrange a time where I or some other appropriate faculty member would join you for 1 or 2 sessions. Okay. And I'd be happy to do anything more you want to. I really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you so much.
So I took up 2 of the 5 minutes we have left.
Yeah,
So any last?
We have to add additional ones. No, I'm kidding. So who has any questions or comments? We are at the end of the discussion. But as John, you said, we can definitely have another meeting.
Sure.
And we can we can schedule it soon. So anyway, before that, who wants to I'm sure Mihai Lisevski wants to say something. Something tells me that he wants to say something.
Anytime. You can hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I muted you.
Well, I think that I really enjoyed the question Roxana, I think, had about the initiators, and in my mind, because I'm teaching. This is one of my negative aspects in my activity. I'm used to put things into under certain labels, and what came into my mind was the label of social entrepreneurship, and I'm happy that John would agree with me. But the idea is that whatever we speak about ABC method or about connecting as a role, what's behind it, it's the concept of social entrepreneurship. It means somebody who has an initiative, who is ready to take the responsibility of doing something for the community. Mm-hmm. The way it's done, I mean, again, using one method or another, ABCD would be a very good method in our case, or the role it plays, it's still related to the concept of social entrepreneurship. And I think this is very important. It's very important, especially in the case of Romania, where entrepreneurship generally, not necessarily the social one, it's not really a common feature in our culture. So I think that, as John stressed a couple of times, identifying persons with a natural talent, with the potential to develop such an initiative would be the best success scenario in the case of initiators which were mentioned.
Yeah. Good. May I? One of the things you might do is in Edmonton, you might get Howard Lawrence, who is now the director of neighborhoods, to talk with you about their experience in finding local connectors. Mm-hmm. That is, how do they do that? What's the method? They start out with none, and now they've got a couple hundred, right? So let me suggest that as a resource. And let me qualify a little. I understand what you mean by social entrepreneur, but connectors usually don't end up being leaders. They are, the resource is people they put together, not them. They're not leaders usually. And I don't know whether you will have this word. In the United States, on a lot of neighborhoods, they would say of somebody on the block, she or he is a busybody. Is that a word you know? Busybody? She knows everybody. She knows everything, right? She's a busybody, right? So often it is the busybody who you start with, right? And you're looking at least for busybodies, right? I am going to have to sign off now. Wonderful to be with you. If any of you want to have us do, this is what we do, because we have no paid staff. We are a bunch of people who are committed to this way of developing citizen power, we would say. That this is mainly about strengthening democracy at the local level by having people become producers of the future rather than consumers of institutional outputs. How's that?
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much
Okay.
for your
Let's do
time.
it again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, what about the rest? Can you stay another 5 minutes?
Yes.
Oh,
He just
excellent.
answered my question somehow, I guess.
What question,
I'm
Misha?
happy. I was thinking in linked to his story in our kind of stories and projects, when in whatever community, what do you do when you're the kind of, without bragging or something, be in line, first in line connector, the one who sees the opportunities and the assets not being used? What do you do in that case? And yeah, I guess this finding that busybody is one thing, and the first group of connectors involving the community somehow. And yeah, something like that. That was the question. What do you do when you are an outsider, you want to promote an idea, where you find some resources and you get an idea of how they could be used? And his story was one case like that.
I was thinking that maybe, I mean, we can have that guy that John mentioned from Edmonton community, abandoned community, to join us for the well, not the next maybe event, but one of the next events. What do you think?
That would be fantastic. Fantastic.
Cool.
That will answer more questions.
I want to kindly ask you, Gustavo, to, I mean, you have some incredible experience working with the you know, groups in rural communities in Guatemala, and you've told me some beautiful stories. Maybe you can share a little bit of, you know, about your experience working with poor communities in the rural areas in there.
Yeah, I'm glad. Sorry, I for my English, but I don't practice so much. But yes, well, in my experience, I think the participation, or the citizen participation, it occurs in a very natural way here, because as I put you in the chat, for example, in some communities, especially in the indigenous areas, the abuelos or the grandfathers or the grandmothers, they are like the connectors of the community, because they are like the main resources there. I've been seeing in some communities that these people connect youth people, and they translate their knowledge to them. So the practices, the democratic practices, they translate that in oral ways. They don't has anything right. They just it just happened naturally. They discuss in the kitchen. They discuss in some particular weeknight, and they come together. They teach the youth people what they have been learning from the past, especially to keep the customs, to keep the language, to keep all these cultural norms. And it's beautiful in some parts, because they they resolve a lot of things, a lot of issues in the community. They also, in these particular cases, they make some justice proceedings uh, to allow the people going to these abuelos or these ancient authorities, and they solve the things in a very peaceful way. So they have their own local justice system based in these Asian practices. So this is very beautiful to see that, because they don't need to go to the official system in order to arrange or to solve some issues, because they already know how to do it, because they have been doing this for 500 years in some parts. So I think the connectors are could be a lot of people in the community. Could be a a young woman, a young man, and it's very necessary to have this, because I've been seeing with youth people, especially, that they have the whole potential to do it, or they want to do a lot of things in the community, but sometimes they need somebody else, like these people, like the abuelos or other people, to help them to go in a very good direction, and especially when they have to go to with institutions as the local government and all these kind of things. So yeah, Guatemala has, I have like a lot of histories, but I know that there is no more time, but I am glad if we have another opportunity, I can share more with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gustavo. And by the way, in Europe, we call it a very good English, what you've just used.
Thank you.
So anyway, just to briefly say, I mean, Gustavo is doing amazing work in Guatemala as a lawyer, and he's in an one of the most prestigious NGO dealing with human rights and so on in Guatemala. Gustavo, maybe 1 minute to tell a little bit about the history of the NGO that you are part of, because it's iconic.
Okay, I work for Mirna Mack Foundation. So Mirna Mack, she was an anthropologist. So she was killed like 25 years ago, because she finds a lot of things related with the uh, conflict in Guatemala, with the militaries and the civil war here. So she was killed, and her sister, Helen Mack, she's the president of the organization now. She runs, she opens with other people this foundation that, and we fight for to keep the justice system in a very good way, in a healthy way. And yeah, I work in 5 areas of Guatemala, and we also uh, keep looking for which are those particular um, processes in which the government they have committed a lot of corruption here. We did a huge fight against corruption in my organization in several ways. So it's like the work we do with a lot of communities and areas, studies and investigations, research in certain ways on citizen participation, uh, things like that.
Working with judges, with lawyers, in order to
Yeah.
understand, to understand, human rights, and how to defend people who are, they have these rights violated, and so on. Anyway, we can have a whole discussion with Gustavo and the team about what they are doing, because it's really, really cool. Any final comments from people that did not talk and they want to talk, or from people that have, I don't know, ideas for future events, and so on? And I'm drinking beer, by the way. Vishal, how was? I mean, you've joined late. How are things in Nepal with the whole situation now, with the COVID-19, and how the, I don't know, how you know, communities are mobilizing to address these issues.
Thank you, Mihai. I just I missed the earlier session. I think it is due to the timings. Actually, in my country, where we luckily we don't have any deaths due to the COVID-19. We have, I think, 30 to 35 cases, positive cases identified. Many of them have recovered. Is one part regarding the status. Other than that, what we have is the rural and urban areas. The government has imposed a lockdown, and you know, people have scattered all around for safety. And we are experiencing, you know, a crisis of people's engagement. So we had in the past we had earthquake, so used to be all people coming together to community service. But now in this crisis, our country has a political system where the it's a, to be honest, it's a communist government, and the citizens role is very weak. The civil society organizations have a very weak status, and due to this, just few days ago, the since the parliament is not running, the president passed a law, you know, as per the instructions of the prime minister, where, you know, the elected parliamentary system was bypassed, and it was executed. So it's not democratic. And during this crisis, where people are more concerned about health, and the government should be providing medical facilities and concentrating on that, rather it took a step to, you know, have this political polarization, and the condition is actually very weak. So there are very less efforts on behalf of citizens, and me as a person, I've been engaged in only two activities now, since I come from a human resource background. I've been trying to identify the gaps between the employers and the employees. Now it's the critical time that employers are trying to shut down business and not pay the employees. So I'm trying to work out as a bridge through associations. We have a Human Resource Professionals Association. I happen to be the general secretary. That is one part. And another initiative I've been taking is to identify vulnerable groups, people with disabilities who have been deprived, like other people who have, you know, participation barrier to participate, but the persons with disabilities have, due to accessibility barriers, have more, they are more vulnerable. So it's, you know, and the greatest thing that's lacking is the deliberation among people, and it's on a critical situation. So I do not have any good news. That's the status.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And again, I mean, I'm talking with our partners, EduCap partners and friends in Nepal, and in the rural communities is much better because they are not, they are not dependent on a lot of supplies from, big cities and so on. So it's a situation as it is here. I mean, I'm currently in a rural area, and if you would not watch TV and you would not some people from time to time wearing the masks, you would not know that there is anything different than a normal spring with people going in the field and working there, they're doing their stuff. Well, cool. So it's 6:25 here in Romania, and well, also in Bulgaria, to be honest. But I would say that let's finish this discussion with a plan to have with us as planned other people. Um, the rhythm is something like once per month. This is what we've done so far. And let's try to get that person that John recommended. I also asked Thomas Poge from Yale University and from ASAP to join us, whereby he will talk more about larger scale, things. He will talk more, about how can we keep on an eye on the big organization, on the states, on big companies, especially during this balamuk, as we call it, during this crisis. Let's see if he has time. If not, I've also asked Larry Brown, who is for years involved in either activism related issues, but also development. He used to be a professor at Harvard and Brandeis University, and he also served as the country director for Peace Corps in Uganda, and now with his wife started a charity helping various organizations in, I think, in Tanzania, in Vietnam and Guatemala, organizations that are working on women's rights and helping girls to get into schools and to have access to education. So these are the ideas. I know that also Alexandra has ideas of people that we can invite. Also Luisa has ideas of people that we can invite during, within these dialogues. And whoever have other people that you might think that can engage with us in these dialogues, which we want to keep it informal, small scale. So we don't want to have 50 people. We want to have people that we know and we trust, and to talk with the people that already, had big battles that they fought, and we can engage in discussions with them. So this is it from me. What, if you have anything to add?
Thank you so much for this.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you also for your time.
It's a pleasure to meet everyone and to hear your stories. I would really like to hear more about this. So maybe in next sessions, we can take a bit of time to tell what everybody's working on.
I would very much want that, because everybody here in the team has amazing stories, and you never know when you want to start something, working something with someone from the group, or just to hear some other crazy people around.
Indeed, what a good crazy bunch.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful evening or morning, Gustavo, and or
Thanks.
late evening, Bishal. And let's, speak soon.
Yes.
Sure.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Once
Take
again,
care.
bye.
See you.
Ah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.